with Ryan.
Today we are learning basketball with Mirin Fader, New York Times best-selling author of Giannis, the Improbable Rise of an NBA MVP and then NBA champion, and Dream, the life and legacy of Hakeem Olajuwon. Can see him poking over my shoulder throughout the podcast on display as usual here. Got to recognize the greatness. She's one of my favorite writers, especially about sports and athletes. And I'll say it every time, just one of the best humanizing authors and writers out there when it comes to just putting players' stories at the forefront and being able to, talk and view players as people just like the rest of us. She's at the Ringer currently, formerly of Bleacher Report, and just has honors all around the country between the Pro Basketball Writers Association as one of the best, sports writers in the country, and covers football, covers basketball, always dropping an interesting piece telling the story about, some great player. Has some of my favorite articles out there. So we hit on a lot of those on the last podcast as well. So I wanted to really dive into the Giannis book today. One of my favorites. I even told the story on the last one of how much it saved me that one time. So just can't wait to dive in. But how are you doing today, Mira?
Oh man, I'm good. Thank you so much for everything you said, and I'm so happy to be here. Thank you.
Absolutely. And so obviously the first time, oh, by the way, you are the first guest to reappear on the Learning Basketball podcast. So no big deal. Racking up the appearances. We gotta give that a shout, and for good reason. I mean, two of my favorite sports books that I've read, and obviously we dove into the Hakeem book and last time, and there's a handful of things I'd like to talk about more there, but most before we dive into that as well, I wanted to kind of ask you about you as a writer. You mentioned on a different podcast that a couple things about writing, about that the book author lifestyle appealed to you, and that the opening hooks was the most challenging part of writing. The idea of someone might be reading, open your book or your article, and they might dip out after a paragraph if they're not hooked right away, and that works as a good writing incentive to really pull them in. And that brings me right to the Giannis book, how you're thrown right into an eviction process with the family, how they have to move a fridge on a skateboard to their next place of living as the landlord is kicking them out for however many times it is by then, and you just feel all the imagery, and it feels like you're right there with them. So I was wondering, what really appealed to you about the book author lifestyle, and kind of what is your process to decide on that opening hook?
Yeah, I mean, I really appreciate the ability to really dive deep into a subject and interview tons of people. Everybody has a story and a different way of looking at the athlete. And I just love hearing multiple perspectives and then trying to figure out how to put it all together into one cohesive narrative. And, I do that with my stories, but books, I get to do that on a much, much larger scale, interviewing hundreds of people. So I really appreciate the time that I have to do that. I think leads are so tough. I always get stressed, oh my God, is this gripping enough? Is this the right one? But I think it's sort of what message do you want to send the reader? And I think with Giannis and that one in particular, I really did want to show the struggle, but I also want to show the joy. And I think a lot of people just purely talked about the struggle with Giannis, but not the happiness and joy. So, when they lift this fridge, they're laughing and they're giggling and they're just being resourceful and they're being brothers. And it's a moment of pride. So it's kind of flipping it on the head, oh, you think this is about to be a sob story. Here's the brothers, doing what they do, which is just surviving. So I think leads, they don't always come to me immediately. They rarely do. This one, when I heard that story, I was like, wow, I think that's definitely the lead.
Yeah, it's almost like they can't believe it's working as the fridge
Right.
is teetering over a sidewalk as they're moving down the street. And they're they're not embarrassed.
Right.
They're just surviving, like you said. And on the book itself, I have the OG edition behind me, the MVP. I was wondering, what was the process like of adding a new epilogue to the story that's already out, already on its way to New York Times bestseller? And also, how good did it feel knowing that this book was dropping, I don't know, 1 or 2 months after he wins the first championship, and gives you just about as nice of a storybook ending as a book can have, in terms of just that what it means to Milwaukee and the theme of, not winning a championship since Kareem in the 70s. And, will he stay? Will he go until he finally signs that big Supermax extension near the end? That, how good did that feel knowing it was coming out? And, what was it like actually adding the epilogue? Is there anything that, I need to go get the epilogue, and all the people that haven't read it, we got to get the second edition. What are we missing?
100% yes. No, I mean, if you would like to, yes, I would appreciate that. It's so funny when you finish a book, you're like done. You're like, I never want to see this again. I'm done. I can't. People continue to send me Giannis plays. I was like, I simply cannot take it anymore. And so when they won, I was like, oh my God, shit, I have to write something. I thought I was done. And of course, it's the biggest, blessing. And just, I'm so lucky. I'm so grateful. I mean, thanks to the Bucks, but thanks to the basketball gods. Book releases, it's years in advance. It's an arbitrary date picked. I mean, we picked it for, free agency. And so stylistically, once he announced, that he was coming back, I was relieved because I was like, oh, I know how the story's going to end. He's going to stay in Milwaukee. But I never thought it could get even sweeter and win the title because, as you noticed, the whole book is about why they can't win and how Giannis is the missing piece for them to finally achieve that. And so it was just so lucky. It was just so lucky. I feel so lucky.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, I mean, it just feels storybook, like the basketball gods just gifted that ending for it. It just felt right. And, diving into the book and kind of connecting the pieces on both books with one question. There's one game that appears in both books, the 2015 Inaugural Africa game, where Hakeem and Mutumbo surprise everyone, hop in the game in the second quarter with jerseys on, as all these rising international players like Giannis are playing the first NBA official game in Africa to kind of really expand the culture there and get some leagues growing in that area. What can you kind of connect the dots a little bit between these two main characters in both books? Obviously, all-time superstars in the league. And just, were there any similarities between the stories of Hakeem and Giannis, or contrasts that you thought were notable when writing these books? And also just what Hakeem means to the game as the first international superstar, how he paved the way for other international players to have those possibilities.
Yeah. So, when I first did the Giannis book, I didn't know that I was going to do Hakeem as the second book. But when I was thinking of topics, I thought about how, Giannis was very much like the prequel to it. And I wanted to give credit to the first true international superstar who paved the way for Giannis, Joel Embiid, all of these players that are dominating now, Luka. And the more, of course, I thought about it, the more Hakeem and Giannis are so similar. They are both from the same Nigerian tribe. They both grew up with, families that were loving and emphasized hard work and education and sticking together, resilience. Both of them were late bloomers. Hakeem even more so. He didn't start playing till age 17. Giannis was around 13. I think that Hakeem does not get credit for changing the way that basketball is played. But, one of the themes in the book is about how the game is so globalized and the game is so positionless. Those are things that Hakeem really introduced to the NBA and should receive more credit for. And I think that, Giannis saw that in him, and that's why he asked to work out with Hakeem. And so it just kind of comes full circle from that 2015 moment you mentioned in both books, where Giannis is only like in his second year and he sees one of his heroes, Hakeem, and then at the end they're training when Giannis is current day. So I think it's just it shows this full circle moment and how past is present and present is future.
Yeah, and on that kind of theme of player inspirations and even a full circle moment, there were some obvious NBA players that inspired Giannis early on, and then he also got to go up against in the league with these marquee moments in his own career, which were really just cool to kind of see the full timeline where, the names like Kobe Bryant, Kevin Durant, Carmelo Anthony really stand out in what I'm saying there, where, like, for instance, he sees the Greek national team take down LeBron, Melo, and Wade in 2006, all the way back then seeing a big Sofo, aka Baby Shaq, kind of take him down on those teams. And then Giannis has his welcome to the league moment against Carmelo, where he kind of gets his first career, and even later he gets his first career start against Carmelo. So he's able to, you know, kind of have a budding rivalry against Melo, where early on he's this, unknown, this project, and then eventually Melo's like, yeah, of course you're here, like of course you're starting in the All-Star game, like you're Giannis, and he's like, how did that happen so quickly? Where it's just like he's taking over the league instead of, and that I didn't even mention how, like, when he first finds out about, Carmelo, Durant, and Kobe, he's like watching basketball highlights in an internet cafe 2 hours at a time in Greece. Like when he doesn't have a TV or internet at his own home, people start comping him to Dr. J the way he plays. And he's like, who's that? Who's the doctor? So he goes to the cafe. He's like, oh, that's the doctor. And he falls in love with, like, I love how he's like becomes an Allen Iverson fan and just loves that will to win, that like down. I think it said down to like the cornrows and the headbands, like they would try to, even appear like him on the court. So just what all these like all-time greats mean to Giannis, and what it was like to have so many different moments. I hardly even mentioned some with Kobe, but just to hit on some of them, like Larry Drew, one of Giannis's first coach, saw the same competitive drive in Giannis that he did with Kobe, who he coached both of them. And then obviously there's this great kind of back and forth later on with Jason Kidd as the coach, where he introduces Giannis to Kobe. And Giannis is able to ask Kobe all this different advice that basically boiled down to just keep working, and also be curious, ask why, always want to learn, ask questions. And you might have to sacrifice some things for this game, but it's worth it to be great. So could you just highlight what these players really meant to Giannis, and Durant's versatility as well, and what it was like going from idols to their peers?
Yeah, well, I think Giannis had the benefit of, while he did watch a lot of these players in the internet cafes, there were so many that he didn't know. And so because he was not, obsessed with them, he was not afraid of them. And so it kind of worked in his favor that he was a late bloomer and didn't quite know, the terrain of the game. And so he just wasn't afraid of anyone. And so his youthfulness and his innocence sort of helped him in a way. But, he absolutely loved Durant. He wanted to be like Durant. And I just love the competitiveness, because even you have to remember how skinny Giannis was back then. Like, he was not Giannis now. I'm talking like beanpole. And he was just like, yep, I'm going to guard Carmelo. Yep, I'm going to guard. And so you see all the mental toughness and everything right now, except it was in a smaller body that somehow managed to keep growing. So, I think, yes, like in the NBA, you do need physical tools to compete, of course, obviously, but his mental stuff separates him. And you saw that with the way that he wasn't afraid to take on these people. And that doesn't mean that he did great every time, but they respected him because of how hard he played. Like his first All-Star game, they were like, why are you taking this so seriously? Like, it's an All-Star game. And he's like, I got to be ready. I got to be ready. So, and I think even with Kobe, like, so inspired by him. And I think all those players too have enormous respect for Giannis, because they saw where he started and they saw how he developed, right? Like, he looks like he looks like himself, but he doesn't have the baby face anymore, So I think there's just such a respect of like, wow, how quickly this person improved in such a short amount of time.
Right. And, there's so many different themes throughout the book. I'd say that, obviously family is a huge one. And, could you highlight kind of what family means to him from early on with, his dad's influence on his work ethic, learning some footwork from playing soccer as a kid, and this quote that make sure what you give your time to is worth it. You shouldn't wait one more day than what's necessary. If you could accomplish something today, why wait until tomorrow? Go get it today. And, not to give an F mentality, and, the career high 44 points a few weeks after his passing, when Giannis was not quite that player, but he was that day. And even to other relationships with being the big brother to Alex, being the little brother to Thanasis, and just growing up with that dynamic where, Thanasis was maybe a little more loud personality wise, waving the Greek flag on draft night, wearing the bright colored suits, and Giannis would walk around in sweatpants, focused on, practice that day. And you have a nice little sentence to summarize that. Thanasis forever the exclamation point, Giannis the period. That just kind of summarizes a little bit of kind of their personalities a little bit. And Obviously the mom as well, with Veronica, with you know just the fashion and the Nigerian pride, and the dishes like fufu that he misses as he gets a little homesick throughout the journey there. So just to highlight what family means to Giannis, and on top of that, how much the idea of like hurting his family inspires him. Where later in the book, the idea with Mariah and Liam having to run suicides or laps if he misses a free throw is what like incentivizes him to not miss the free throw instead of punishing himself. It's like even worse if he's hurting his family.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's so important to know that, even though he did grow up in immense poverty, he had such a loving family, and his parents, they were so supportive. They were there for him, and they everything they did was for him and his siblings. And so, really wanted to make sure that, their father was given his due, in that in the book, about just what a strong figure he was. And there's so much out of their control. They're not citizens. There's really, I mean, being an immigrant in Greece at that time, even now, very, very, very difficult for people of color. And just the way that they never made their kids feel like they were in trouble or things were bad. It was just, again, let's be resourceful. Let's put the skateboard on, let's put the fridge on the skateboard. And I think that Giannis really took positive aspects from this, learning how to be a leader, leader of his brothers. All of these things translate to later when they lost their father, and it was again like the lowest point of his life and his career. But once again, he was a leader for all of his brothers, and I think that's really so special. It's so hard to lose a parent, especially we forget how young Giannis was then and still is now. So yeah, I just think that, we see the family all the time, right? We see the brothers together, but really like it's a closer bond than I've literally ever seen in any other NBA family. A lot of people think that they're close, but these are very close. They do business together, they work together, they've created foundations together. It's like family means something totally, totally different to them.
The Antetokounmpos, they're a
Yeah.
staple of the league
Right.
at this point. They had their hometown gym renamed to that once they were visiting after he won the MVP and went back home. And hitting on a little bit of the Greece development, I apologize if I mispronounce any of these names, but like Coach Spiros Velliniatis was one of the first coaches to actually find Giannis and really get him to, just begging him at first over and over again to try basketball, and finally getting him to really commit, and his brothers on the Filathlitikos team. I'm trying with Rahman
You
Rana.
know, my audiobook, like, I don't know if you listen to the audiobook, but the struggle was real.
There's a lot, but we're out here trying, and there was players like Rahman Rana, who was like a brother to him at that time, and one, I guess, character of the book, but obviously a person, was Tzikas, the owner of Kivotos Cafe, who just really stood out as like a positive figure in their life, who would always give them an apple a day as they're walking by to practice, and who didn't let Giannis give up basketball to come work for him for money, and instead he just gave him food and told him to keep playing because he saw something in him. So just to highlight some of the people that really helped him along the way get to where he is today.
Yeah, there were so many. I mean, even just, the pastor at the church, like it's amazing how many people helped. There was a landlord who was a bit forgiving on the rent, just like really, really kind. I think that in American basketball players, there is this sense of like, I made it, I worked hard, me, I was in the gym shooting late. Versus, I think that, reporting on Giannis and Hakeem Olajuwon now has just taught me so much against that sort of Western narrative of like individualism. And, Giannis doesn't become who Giannis is without the help of Tzikas, of the Kivotos Cafe. Like, there were so many people that refused to let him languish. And that doesn't mean they thought he was going to be a basketball star. Like, want to be clear, nobody did. But it's just little things like, hey, here's an apple, here's this, people looking out for you, I think in a story that is so amazing like this, there is a tendency for people to embellish stories and to make it seem bigger than it was. And, oh, we knew he was going to be the best and he was destiny. And, the truth is, like, nobody knew that, but they knew that he was kind and he was caring and he cared about his brothers, and people had empathy in order to help him out.
Yeah, and it seemed noticeable on those stories that like how big nutrition might have been in Giannis's story. How if he was fully nourished growing up, he might have grown a few more inches to 7 feet and gained some more pounds working out earlier in life, where maybe he would have been a top draft pick. And I was just curious about things like how he said he wanted to play emotionless, how he didn't wear headphones or listen to music before games or practice because he wanted to keep emotion out. And then he also seemed driven by fear. That seemed to be a big theme as well, where like missing his family, threatening to go back and retire, the fear of losing everything that he had worked for, down to just individual stories like the counting his Oreos to like only wearing one pair of sneakers for the first 5 months of his NBA career because he's just proud of those sneakers just to even have something like that. And just wondering, I guess what helped drive him other than family that we already hit on, and his general work ethic, like these things like emotions and fear. Like how would you, detail that further about what drove him and really helped him on that journey?
I think, if any listeners know who did not grow up with money, when you finally do get it, it's not like the fears go away. In fact, sometimes they can intensify. And I think there was this fear of going back to where they were before, and, fear of failing, fear of losing everything he gained. The brothers would have this dream: what if we woke up and we all were back to where we started? So I think it's this fear of losing and all of that was a motivator as well.
I appreciate you taking the time today. I know we got to hop out, but and obviously there's more to the story with Giannis in the actual NBA. I just really wanted to hit on some of the things that helped him reach there and all his motivations. But I appreciate you taking the time. It's been a lot of fun just talking hoops. I'm always down to talk more. Thanks for hopping
Yeah.
on.
Thank you so much. Always great to talk with you. Appreciate it.
Have a good one.
Thanks.
With Ryan.
Learning Basketball is a Swish Theory podcast hosted from Beyond the Arcade. Hey, that's me. You can find my work on Twitter, YouTube, Substack, and check out the team's writing at theswishtheory.com.